Ida for telling my dad that he and his wife deserve whatever is happening to them right now and refusing to help them out. So, my father, 44M, started dating my stepmom Julia, 30F, when I was around 16 and they got married 2 years later. Just FYI, the woman never liked me and she's actually the reason I got kicked out of my house at 19. Since then, I haven't had any contact with either my dad or her until a couple of days ago, when my father showed up at my house to talk to me. I'll get to that later, but first, I have to get into everything that went wrong so people get an idea of what kind of a person Julia really is. So my mother passed away when I was just 9 years old, and since then, my dad had been in several relationships, but he was very serious about Julia right from the beginning. She moved in with us within a couple of months, and even though she was just a couple of years older than me, she actually expected me to call her mom. For context, I was 16 at the time and she was 24. We were just 8 years apart in age, and I didn't think it was appropriate for me to call her mom or even think of her as somebody maternal, so I never did call her mom. Even if she had been older, I probably wouldn't have called her mom because it had just been 6 years since my biological mother had passed away, and I was not ready to start calling somebody else mom and replace her so soon. Besides, when she requested this weird thing, she had only been with my father for 8 months and they had already moved in together, and my father could take their relationship as fast or as slow as they wanted, but that didn't mean that I would have to accept her into my family at the same speed. Especially considering the fact that she hadn't even made any effort to get along with me or whatever, I didn't think it was appropriate for her to even request something like that, and I told her, as politely as I could, that I would not feel comfortable referring to her as my mom because I did not feel particularly attached to her yet, and neither did I think of her as a maternal figure in my life. I don't think I had been disrespectful towards her, but I don't know why, from that day on, she started picking on me for no reason. She would either be very nasty with me, or she would ignore me altogether, and it was honestly very weird. I knew for a fact that she was doing this just because I had refused to call her mom, even though I didn't understand back then, and I still don't understand how it was ever going to make a difference in her life. Because as far as I was concerned, my dad adored her and couldn't get enough of her, and he had completely accepted her as his partner, so that's what should have mattered to her. Instead, she was obsessed with becoming my mother somehow and would even act like she actually was, until I reminded her that she really wasn't. And I'm not talking about her being motherly in a good and caring way. She would just boss me around all the time and try to act like she had any authority on me to prove herself to be a competent maternal figure or something, maybe. So then, I would get annoyed and I would have to remind her that she wasn't actually my mom and that she didn't need to get so involved in my life because I was not ready to give that position. Then she would inevitably complain to my dad, and we would fight, but eventually, my dad and I loved each other, so we made up in spite of Julia. This is how we spent almost 4 years, and after they got married, I actually hoped that maybe Julia would start behaving normally since she didn't have any reason to be insecure anymore. But their marriage made her even more determined to become my mom, and a couple of months after they got married, she sat me down once again, and we had the same discussion. This time, she told me that she would really appreciate it if I called her mom because now that she and my dad are married, it would be better to complete our family, and I needed to accept her as my mother for that. But by then, I had already seen her true colors, and I couldn't even understand how she actually had the audacity to demand that I call her my mom after mistreating me for the past 4 years. It wasn't even as if I was particularly happy about them being married because I knew that she didn't like me at all, and neither was I particularly a fan of her. And I am not one to mince words, especially not when I was 18, so I made it very clear to her that after the way she had treated me for the past 4 years, I had no interest in accepting her as my mother or completing the family or whatever her goal was. I told her now that she was married to my dad, that's all she should focus on and stop obsessing over becoming my mom because it was pathetic. I already had a mom and unfortunately, I had lost her to an accident, but that didn't mean the position was up for grabs like she thought. In very clear and civil words, I told her that I loved my mother and I was not going to replace her, so she needed to stop trying. And I also told her that her obsession with trying to be my mom was weird, creepy, and I did not appreciate it one bit, especially considering the fact that she had actually gone out of her way to treat me badly just because I wouldn't call her mom. I'm not proud of it because it's not very politically correct, but I did imply that there was something mentally off with her because of this obsession that she had, and I guess that really rubbed her the wrong way then. Because after that discussion and that remark about her mental state, she completely stopped talking to me. It was as if I did not exist to her, and in my opinion, I didn't think it was a problem back then. I was actually pretty relieved that she had finally decided to get off my back, but then about a year later, I realized that she had been putting her time to good use and poisoning my own father against me. It happened very slowly, so I didn't exactly realize that my dad was distancing himself from me, and by the time I did start finding things we had, it was too late to change anything. It's not like I didn't try. I did make several attempts to bond with him, hang out with him, and talk to him, but he was either always too busy or he was with Julia. I could understand that after his second marriage, his priorities had changed, and I tried to give them their space, but that backfired because Julia took up all the space that he had in his life. It got worse when I went away to college, and whatever contact I had with my dad, we started losing that too. It felt terrible and I felt like I had to do something about it, so one time, I decided to surprise him by coming back for a weekend, and that's when I got kicked out. When I came back, I had expected my dad to be happy about it, but he seemed annoyed and told me that he had plans to go out for dinner with Julia, but now that I was home, he couldn't do that. I found that very insulting, and I confronted him about his behavior, telling him that he was being very distant and weird and that I was really hurt by the fact that he wasn't even happy that I had returned home to surprise him like this. I told him that I felt like he didn't even care about me anymore, and I couldn't help but take a dig at Julia, saying that I knew that this was her doing, that she was somehow turning him against me. And that turned into a full-blown argument. My dad told me that he knew that I had had something against Julia right from the first day, and it was actually not her who was trying to turn him against me, but it was the other way around. He accused me of trying to brainwash him and make Julia out to be the bad guy, but he knew that she had been trying her best to win me over, and I was the one who had been rejecting her attempts to bond with me because I did not want to betray my mother, but he said that even my mom would be disappointed in my behavior. He told me that I needed to stop making up lies about Julia to get him to hate her because it was not going to work. Slowly, I learned that for the past few months, Julia had been reversing everything and telling my dad that apparently, I was the one who had been ignoring her, and even before that, I was the one who had always treated her badly. It helped her case that whenever my dad was around, she was never rude to me, she was pleasant, and my dad never believed that she was even capable of being nasty to anybody. So gradually, my dad had started to actually believe that maybe I was the one who was creating problems because I was not ready to accept Julia as his wife and come to terms with the fact that he had moved on, even though that was far from the truth. I tried to explain to him that he had got it all wrong, that I was the victim in the situation, but he was not ready to believe me. He accused me of not liking Julia, and trying to ruin their relationship by lying to him about her, and told me that if I could not respect Julia and their relationship, then he had no space for me in his life or his home anymore. Basically, he gave me an ultimatum and told me that I could either start giving her the respect that she deserved and call her mom, or I could leave. I had no idea that this was going to get to such a stage, but when my dad said that, I didn't even bother to argue anymore. I hadn't unpacked any of my stuff, so I just grabbed my bags and walked out, and never looked back. After that, I went straight to my uncle's place because out of all my relatives, he was the one that I was closest to. He's my mom's older brother who has a soft corner for me, so I knew that whatever problems I had afterward, he would help me out with it. I hadn't told him much about the situation with Julia because I already knew that he did not like her and he did not approve of my dad's relationship with her, partly because he was loyal to my mom, just like me, and also because he thought it was kind of weird that my dad and Julia had such a huge age gap. Anyway, I didn't want to make him dislike my dad even more than he already did at that point in time, so I hadn't told him much about Julia, but after I got kicked out, and went to him, I explained the entire situation and he was furious. He told me that I had done the right thing by refusing to call her mom and called Julia a total nutcase and my dad an idiot of the highest order for falling for all her lies. Once he knew the truth, he told me that he was going to take care of everything and said that he was going to be covering all my expenses, including my college tuition, from now on, which had been my dad's responsibility earlier. He also told me that whenever I needed to come back home, I could stay with him, and even after I graduated, he would help me out. And he stayed true to his word, that he helped me out every step of the way and was more of a dad to me in the past 6 years than my biological father has been. For the past 6 years, like I said, in the beginning, I haven't had any contact with my dad or Julia. And neither has the rest of the family, because after I told my uncle about everything, he told everybody else. I didn't exactly ask him to do that, but he was just so furious that he didn't care about the consequences, he just told everyone. Obviously my mom's side of the family is aware of what my father did, but my uncle made it a point to even reach out to my dad's side of the family so that everyone would know, and from what I've heard, nobody has been in touch with them after I got kicked out because they were all against what happened. My uncle has told me that several people even tried to speak to my dad and knock some sense into him, but he refused to listen to them and told them that I was a liar and they should not believe me. But, thankfully, my family knows that I'm not the kind of person that my father and Julia were painting me to be, and they have been pushed into complete isolation, but I don't think that they care since they haven't bothered to reach out to anybody for the past 6 years. I, on the other hand, have been doing pretty well for myself. I started interning at my uncle's real estate firm after I graduated from college, and now, I have my realtor's license, and earlier this year, I moved out from my previous apartment into a much more spacious one in a better neighborhood. So financially, I don't have anything to worry about anymore, and I've even started paying back my uncle, even though he doesn't really want anything back from me. My financial condition is relevant in this situation because I'm guessing that that's why my dad decided to get back in touch with me since karma has finally caught up with them, and recently, a couple of months after Julia gave birth, she got into a terrible accident and now, she's on bed rest and unable to even move a muscle. As I mentioned in the beginning, my dad visited me a couple of days ago, and after speaking to him, I learned that he had quit his job a couple of years back and started his own business, but that hasn't been going well because the pandemic hit right after he started. So financially, it's been a struggle for him, and on top of that, Julia has also refused to take up any jobs and the entire burden of handling finances is on his shoulders. It's not surprising because right after they got married, Julia quit her job, and that should have been a red flag for him, but I guess my dad never thought of removing his rose-colored glasses when it came to her. Anyway, things got even more tense financially when she discovered she was pregnant and decided that she was going to keep the baby. She gave birth about 6 months back, and then last month, while she was driving herself back home from lunch with her friends, she ended up totaling the car due to a combination of slippery roads and a little too much champagne. Luckily, she got away with no charges, but that doesn't even matter because she injured herself pretty badly and now, she can't even do anything except wait to heal. My dad is in a very difficult spot right now because their medical insurance doesn't cover hiring a nurse, so he has to pay for that out of his own pocket since it's not like he can stay back with Julia and take care of her. He has to go to work since he'll end up broke otherwise. And so far, they've been leaving the baby with Julia's parents, but they haven't been happy about that arrangement, and recently, they have told my dad that they need a life of their own as well, so they cannot watch their grandchild every single day. He ended up getting into a fight with them because of how selfish they were being, and now, they have refused to look after their grandchild altogether. My dad told me that he's been trying to think of a way that he can work this out, but unfortunately, since he doesn't have enough money to afford a babysitter and doesn't have any family members willing to help them out either, he realized that he would finally have to come to me and have me help him out instead because he couldn't think of anybody else he could count on. After hearing him out, I instantly declined without even thinking about it twice. I'm already not good with babies, and on top of that, if this was his and Julia's child that we were talking about, then I wanted nothing to do with that kid. The two of them had hurt me enough in the past, so I obviously did not want to be a pushover and help them out with their child, regardless of what they were going through. So I declined, and I told my dad that while it was nice seeing him, I knew he was here for some purpose, and unfortunately, I was not here to serve his purpose anymore. He started arguing with me, telling me that he had gone to great lengths just to get my contact info and he was not leaving until I forgave him and agreed to help him out. From that, I figured out that he must have bothered and pestered some relatives for a while because otherwise, frankly, I don't think there would have been any way for him to find out where I stayed until they finally told him where I stayed, and I wouldn't call that going to great lengths. And I was already pretty upset by him. His entitlement upset me even more, and I told him that back when I really needed him to believe me, he hadn't. He had chosen Julia over me, and now, I'm choosing myself over him. So I kept asking him to leave, but he wouldn't budge, and finally, I really lost it, and I told him that if he did not go away, I would really call the cops on him and that would end up getting very ugly for him. In the heat of the moment, I told him that I did not have any sympathy for him, and I was not interested in helping him out or even forgiving him, because I believed that everything that he was going through right now, he and Julia deserved every bit of it. Because she had endlessly lied about me and made me look like the bad guy to the extent that he actually kicked me out, and he, instead of believing his own daughter, prioritized his wife and her ridiculous demands. He seemed shocked when I said that, and then, he quickly left without a word. But now, I feel guilty because of what they're going through. I know it's terrible and I feel like I shouldn't have said that they deserve it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I'm not the judge of that. I just feel very guilty right now, so Ida, for telling my dad that he and his wife deserve whatever is happening to them right now and refusing to help them out. Edit. So I called up my uncle and I told him about my dad's visit, and he spoke to a couple of relatives and he confirmed for me that my dad had apparently been reaching out to everyone after many years to ask for my whereabouts. Most people hadn't replied, but one of my relatives, on my dad's side, who's not very close to me, started feeling bad for my father and decided to give out my contact info and address. I guess I was right. My dad didn't have to go to great lengths as he claimed. He was just trying to make me feel guilty, I guess. Update 1. Thank you to everybody who commented on my post. It was a pretty long post and I haven't exactly spoken about this at length to anyone apart from my uncle, so it felt good to get it all off my chest. Especially everything about Julia. It really traumatized me when I was younger, and judging by the comments, I don't think that I was wrong for implying that she must have had some mental problems for being so desperate to have me accept her as my mother. But that's all that I can do. I can only imply it. I can't actually diagnose her or whatever, but I think it would do her a great lot of good to go visit a psychiatrist and figure out what the heck is wrong with her that she was driven to act like that, all because I did not call her, or accept her as, my mom. As for my father, throughout his relationship with Julia, I kept trying to come up with excuses for his behavior because I knew that he loved her, and for his sake, I tried not to be too much trouble, but I don't think he cared about that even one bit. Because when it really came down to it, he picked Julia over me, his biological daughter. So really, he had some guts showing up at my house, expecting me to help them out after 6 years of no contact. Even now, I know that he was apologizing just because he wanted me to help him, not because he really meant it. So I did what I had to. I amped up security measures around my place in case he decided to show up again, and this time, if he didn't leave the second I asked him to, I'm gonna call the cops without wasting any time. Ideally, I would prefer for him not to show up at all, but I know that's wishful thinking. He's definitely going to come back and try to demand that I help him out once again. He already has my contact info, so he had been texting me for the past couple of days after his visit, but I blocked him within a couple of hours itself. Now, almost 5 days have passed since his last visit, and I guess he has been biding his time, but I have this gut feeling that he's going to show up once again. Just FYI, it's not that I'm scared of what he might do, it's just that I'm already emotionally drained and I don't want some drawn-out confrontation with him. So that's why I'm taking all the measures that I possibly can to avoid talking to him too much, and just have him go away as soon as possible. I'm hoping that the next time I see him, it's not too bad for me emotionally. Update 2 days back, I posted here, and I said that I was sure that my dad was going to show up, and he did. He waited for a week from our last meeting to show up again today, and like I said, when I saw him standing outside and ringing the doorbell, I told him through the intercom that I was not willing to speak to him. I had just come back home from work, so I was already kind of tired, and I was in no mood to deal with him. So as soon as he told me that he was not going away, I just took out my phone and called the cops and reported him for trespassing. He couldn't hear me from the inside, so he had no idea that I had called the cops, and until they showed up, he just stood outside my door and kept banging on the door, telling me that I was being too hard on him, and Julia had told him that she had made everything up. So now, both of them are very sorry about everything, but that's all they can do, apologize to me and hope for the best. It's not like they can actually go back in the past and change it, so I need to cut them some slack, especially considering what they are going through right now. I couldn't believe the fact that, even after he had found out that Julia had lied to him about everything and had made him kick me out, he was still getting defensive about whatever had happened instead of owning up to his mistakes. When he was talking to me, he was treating the whole thing with such a casual attitude that it was really infuriating for me, but I still kept my cool and I didn't respond to him. I'm thankful that the cops arrived within time, because his whole "what can we do about it now?" shtick was really getting on my nerves, especially considering the fact that he had ruined his relationship with his only daughter because of a bunch of lies that Julia had told him, and he couldn't even be bothered to hold her accountable for it. Anyway, when the cops finally showed up, he completely lost it at me and started cursing me out, telling me that I had lost my mind and that I had no right to call the cops on my own father, but I didn't care. I explained the entire situation, and I don't think that he's going to have any charges against him, but at the very least, this is going to teach him a lesson. When he was being taken away, he did not go kicking and screaming, but he was glaring at me the entire time, and I knew that he felt humiliated, but I didn't care. I was just glad that he was being taken away and I wouldn't have to deal with him. It might sound cruel, but after what happened today, the way he didn't even seem to care that Julia had lied to him and ruined our relationship, I really do think that whatever I had said was absolutely correct. He and Julia deserved each other, and more importantly, they deserved whatever was happening to them. Maybe the little one didn't though. The only person that I feel bad about in this entire situation is my half-brother, but well, there's not much that I can do about that except just hope for the best. And I do hope for the best, only for him, at the very least. Because I don't really have anything against him, he's just a kid, he doesn't even know what his parents are like. I'm just praying that he doesn't have to get caught in the crossfire of anything and doesn't have to suffer for them. Since then, he would be the second child that Julia and my dad ended up failing after me. Update 3. So after the cops took him away, my dad did not contact me for almost 3 weeks. Then, a couple of days ago, I received a text saying that what I had done was horrible, that I was a terrible person, and that they regretted reaching out to me in the first place because it was foolish of them to expect that I would understand their predicament right now, since I had always been a selfish brat who couldn't care less about anyone else, and that's what had ruined my relationship with my father, not Julia. It was not from a number that I recognized, so I'm assuming that it was probably from my dad or from Julia. Either way, it doesn't matter. That was the last I heard from them, and until now, they haven't reached out to me again. That was just a few days back, and interestingly enough, I heard about my dad and Julia once again today because my uncle called me up to tell me that he had heard from a couple of relatives on my dad's side that apparently, he and Julia are staying separately right now because he has been asked to move out of his own house, so Julia's parents can stay with her and take care of her and the baby. From what he has heard, this is all because my dad had suggested placing their baby in foster care until they're back on their feet again, and they had enraged Julia so much that she had actually threatened to divorce him, but somehow, he was able to come down, but she was still so mad that she decided to have him kicked out of the house until she recovered. I think it's pretty ironic that after throwing me out, he is now facing the same thing. But one thing is for sure, there is definitely something mentally wrong with Julia because normal people don't behave in such extremities. Anyway, that's not something that I need to worry about because she's not a part of my life. I just find it funny that my dad is going through this and I felt like I had to share it. This really is his karma.